As we all know, the hospitality industry is facing big challenges, and a new kind of hospitality is emerging. Today, we're going to talk through the current state of the hotel industry, and we're going to talk about this evolution that's taking place. So, as I said, this is going to be an in-depth conversation with two very special guests, two non-traditional hoteliers. Moniqua Lane is joining me from the Downtown Clifton in Tucson, Arizona.
Hi.
And Damon Lawrence is also here today. He is the founder of Homage Hospitality, the first hotel group dedicated to Black travelers. Hey, Damon. Oh, shoot, Damon's on mute.
No, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Good. Perfect. Yeah. I can hear you now.
All right.
So I've been lucky enough to interview these two, and today is going to be a bit of a continuation. We want to dive in and we want to go deep. That is really important. We are going to answer some questions today. So we talked to the Travel Unity panel, and these are sort of the issues that came up. One, we want to talk about the guest experience. We want to talk about personalization. We're going to talk about how hotels can be true community partners. We'll talk about how to leverage media and marketing. And finally, what's ahead for these two hoteliers and our industry. All right, Moniqua, Damon, here we go. So we've set the stage, and this year has been, we could call it interesting. We've learned a lot about ourselves and our neighbors. 2020 will always be remembered as the year when, what hit the fan, right? I'm not sure if I can curse on this, so I won't. This year has presented countless challenges, particularly in hospitality, but it's also given us time to sort of look at the way that we do things, look at the way we operate and the way we market, and make some much needed change. So if the first half of 2020 was uncertain and frantic, then the second half gives us an opportunity to fit the pieces back together in a way that's hopefully better. So Moniqua, you opened the Downtown Clifton 5 years ago. So let's talk about the hotel. And if you will, what has sort of crystallized for you in this last year?
Nothing's crystallized for me in this last year, Amy. Everything is still frantic and crazy and trying to fit the pieces together. I guess for me, what has come up, and I actually did take some notes on it, is a little bit of what you've said, is that for me, the pandemic particularly, I think of as an accelerator of trends. And the boutique experience, particularly the niche experience, was a trend that I came to in 2015, and certainly I didn't come at the beginning of it. I'm not, any sort of path breaker or anything. But it was interesting for me as I was doing this, trying to build a genuine boutique experience, to see the soft brand evolution, if you will. The soft brands come to market. So your autograph collections or what have you, soft brands of major flags. And to have those people sort of muscle into that space as a genuine, authentic boutique hotel was difficult for me to deal with. And it's been interesting because what I've always thought is those are going to fall off. If you're patient and you do things right, and you genuinely speak to your guests and to your audience, they'll sort of see through that, or they won't, and they won't care, and they weren't your guests to begin with. And I think what I've seen here in 2020 particularly is that that's really come to the fore. So of course, in the early days, our occupancy was incredibly low because nobody could travel. But what we're seeing is our guests have been warm to us when they couldn't travel, and are coming back to us very warmly. And it's funny to use the expression with open arms because, nobody's touching or we're all social distanced, but we've been well received. We've been hugged by our guests as they return to travel, and we've been, hugging them, if you will, with our genuineness and authenticity. And when you look at, distressed assets in this segment, what you start to see coming distressed and what will probably fall out of the market are those soft brands that don't speak genuinely to guests or to authenticity. So it's been interesting to figure out how we fit and how we grow within that landscape? You know, are things clearing, and is there a more viable opportunity for us, or are things still super chaotic? You know, we'll see, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, you make a really strong distinction between the soft brands, which are sort of marketing themselves as independent, and then the truly independent properties like yours. So Damon, I'll turn it over to you. From the 30,000-foot view, what Moniqua is describing, do you think a lot of, do you see this sort of difference between independent hotels and more of the soft brands? Do you think this industry is having a reckoning and this pandemic has sort of launched that?
Yes, I definitely do. I totally agree with everything that Moniqua said. The interesting thing for us is all of the soft brands started to reach out to us, right? Very early on, realizing the power and the potential that we have as a brand and what that can do. We speak to a segment of their market that they weren't speaking to prior and are trying to tap into now. We ultimately ended up deciding to go with design hotels.
Okay.
And the reason why we did that was twofold. Obviously, it helps on the financing side, but also it allows us to stay truly independent, right? Design Hotels has Proper Hotels as part of their portfolio. Lifehouse is now part of their portfolio. And so we felt good coming behind that. But I agree. I think that the soft branding that we saw, I think Marriott was one example. They had so many, it was hard to keep up. They were coming up with a new soft brand, it seemed like every couple of months. And what you realize at the end of the day is even if you go to Autograph Collection or Tribute and you look at their requirements, very rigid, doesn't really allow you to go outside of the box. It doesn't really allow you to speak to your clientele directly. They kind of did a surface level boutiquing of a large property. And a lot of times taking an old Marriott and then turning it into an Autograph Collection. And it doesn't really speak to the local culture, the local vibe, or the local community as well. And so, yeah, totally agree. I think I'm excited about what design hotels can do for us, especially being connected to the Marriott reservation system, but not dealing with any of the stipulations that come along with that.
Yeah. So, okay. So in your experience, so you are signing on and getting the design hotels to come on and help you with things like the booking engine and to be able to grow your brand. So that's really interesting because I guess there's pros and cons of that branding, but the like to Moniqua's point is you don't want to lose, and to your point too, Damon, you do not want to lose that sense of community. And what you're saying is by signing this contract, I am holding on to that completely. There's no question about that.
Exactly. And honestly, prior to maybe even about 8 months ago, I would have thought, man, this is going to the dark side, right? I'm signing over to the dark side. I didn't want to do that. What I had to realize, and this actually happened after talking to the CEO of Dream Hotels, was that is how they started. They started with Wyndham, did that for 5 years, then broke free and became truly independent. But they needed that in the beginning to secure loans, which is obviously going to be tough right now as we go out to secure debt, to even gain equity, right? People want to know, are you connected to a reservation system? So for us, in the way we want to grow, it made the most sense. And I said to myself that there was one that I could identify with. But yeah, I would like to be in the same sentence as Proper and Lifehouse and the Avalon. And those brands, to me, stand alone by themselves. And you would never know that they were connected to design hotels in any way.
Right. So Amy, if I could jump in real quick, I did want to talk a little bit about that fine distinction that you made, Damon, which is between like a soft brand that is, like you said, it's like a gloss on, you know, your basic flag and what you're doing. And honestly, that is the path I want to go on. So I've got a hotel and I'm starting a second, and I'd like to do others, you know, sort of the style that we do. And so ultimately, I would also like to be part of a portfolio. That's the end game, right? But I think you touched on something super interesting when you were talking about the decision to do that. And when we talk about equity and inclusion, inclusion in equity, inclusion in financing, inclusion in these nuances of developing and operating a business, a hotel, real estate, all of that. It's a thing I was thinking about right before I got on this call. Those are the nuances that I think, let me say, non-traditional hoteliers or real estate developers such as ourselves, those are the nuances that you don't understand, right, until you start playing the game. And I was thinking about, how do you get to know the nuances of that? And one of the avenues to it can be exactly what you've done, is working with that kind of brand portfolio that you trust. So now I'm deadly curious about how you got to do enough hotels before you got to a brand portfolio that you trusted that helped. But it's an interesting way to think of it as an entree to being a hotel magnate or mogul or whatever it is we're doing here.
Yeah, well, that's my next question. So that's a perfect segue. So Damon, let's talk about Homage Hospitality. I mean, your vision not so long ago versus to what's come into focus for you this year. Can you share a bit about that?
Yeah, so we opened up a small property in New Orleans in 2018. It did really well. We were, then featured. So we sold rooms on OTAs as well as on Airbnb, right? And so then we had a nationally televised Airbnb commercial that ran for a while, and billboards, and did a whole marketing campaign with Airbnb. And then right before the pandemic hit, we had an opportunity to exit that property. And we were also in the process of buying another property in Oakland, right? So it was a good opportunity. Exit this one, buy. We got caught in the middle of the two, right? So we were able to exit the one, got caught in the pandemic with the second one in Oakland, and it kind of derailed our growth plan a little bit. And I think, to Moniqua's point, early on, it was very foggy and hard to figure out where things were going to go. I think fast forward a couple months, and it started to look a lot more clear, especially today. And right now, we have about 3 properties under contract, and it's actually looking really good, probably better than it's ever looked as far as securing capital, which is interesting, right? Mm-hmm. We've had to get creative. We've had to do things in a non-conventional way. I think for us, what's beautiful is we're going at a key count that most people wouldn't touch, right? So the larger players are still stuck in this big hotel kind of key count. And we're attacking the smaller keys, but the impactful vision. And so it's been easier this go around to raise equity, challenging to raise debt still. But signing with Design Hotels has made that a little bit easier, right? Because what was happening before is we would have this beautiful idea, we would go to a bank and say, oh, we love it, but we only do the big 5, right? And Marriott, Hilton, Hyatt, and whatever other 2 that they want to throw in there. And so now we can say, well, wait, but we are with Marriott, with Bonvoy via Design Hotels, and that's opened up more opportunity from the debt side. And so that's probably the best benefit, especially, we're signed on for 5 years at each property. And so the way I see it, stay on for the next 5 years, prove that we'll get direct bookings more than anything. More of our bookings, I believe, will come directly from our website than from the Marriott side, and then break free from that after 5 years.
Gotcha. So you'll also retain your identity with your own website and then also the chain side website. So that we call that for those listening, that's a vanity website in our industry. That's what it's called. Vanity website to us is the one where all the good stuff goes in. And the Marriott site is kind of just where people who are loyal to Marriott end up going and booking whatever is available. So that vanity website is really important.
The one other thing I want to add to that is we had all the leverage in negotiations as well, right? And so even negotiating the fees and how we ramp up, negotiating how many reward redemptions come to the property, right? Because you don't want to get killed by a whole bunch of people, redeeming their rewards at your property and you're not making money. So we were able to really kind of run the table as far as negotiations, because they wanted our brand to be a part of theirs, and we needed them to help us. But we kind of ran the table as far as I was concerned.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. How many keys are you talking about?
We're looking at a property in Napa that's 29 keys. We're looking at a small property in New Orleans, it's about 15. And then a property in Baltimore that's about 30.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Moniqua, your property is 30, is that right? Or 22?
Yep, just went from 10 to 30 immediately before the pandemic.
What timing, right? So I love your story too. When I think of you as a non-traditional hotelier, I think of, your story. It's so great. So I would love if you could share what you were doing, what you ended up doing. I think it's a cool story.
That's funny. I find it super boring, but the gist of it is the fourth time I left the practice of law, it stuck. And then out of the frying pan into the fire, right? I jumped from law to real estate development. Is that what I thought I was doing? And then even worse, into the gas line, jumped into putting a hotel on that real estate, which I was talking with a friend of mine in the industry this morning. He pointed out, which I think is true, you can't really separate real estate development from or a hotel. In a hotel, you can't separate real estate development from operating the hotel. So you don't just get to have fun with dirt and walk away. You really do have to, be hands-on and operate it. And it's been wow, not what I expected when I started, but super rewarding. I did this funny thing so I bought, the room I'm sitting in is one of our older hotel rooms. This first half of the property was built in 1948, and then the half where the new rooms are was a dirt lot. And while I was trying to figure out what to do with the dirt lot, I said, well, it used to be a hotel. It wasn't when I got it. I said, why don't I just turn it back into a little hotel for the neighborhood, which in hindsight is preposterous to build a hotel just for a neighborhood, right? So the hotel sits in between two historic neighborhoods that have small houses. People want to visit, they don't have anywhere to stay. So in trying to speak to the community in a way that seemed silly, really, at the time, the words out of my mouth sounded so contradictory, but turned out to be so right, because our first guests were from the community. They received us so warmly. If their AC went out, they would stay at the hotel. If they wanted to watch Netflix and the Wi-Fi was out, because that happens a lot in these older neighborhoods here, they'd come to the hotel. And then it grew from there. And then we found that, and I'm sure you probably experience, or maybe you experience this too, Damon, is that the community being inside the hotel is what drew travelers who weren't from inside the community to the hotel. So as silly as it seemed, it was fantastic to actually try to build a hotel for a neighborhood. So
yeah, that's great. It's spot on. I mean, I think it's really interesting. So Damon, turning it back to you. So you came out of college with experience working in some of the best hotels in DC. And I know that you had a turning point pretty early on when you decided, hey, I don't just want to work in hotels. I want to own these things. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, I actually do not like working in hospitality.
I do that all the time.
Sad to say. You know what? I love the guests. I love just the experience that you can provide for travelers. So much of my angst had nothing to do with guests and travelers. It was the internal part of the struggle that you're dealing with a whole bunch of people. But I knew very early on, and it was actually Obama's first inauguration where I said to myself, you know what? I want to do this, but I want to be the owner, right? Mm-hmm. He lived the lifestyle that I wanted, right? He had properties in cities that he loved. He would go and travel to those specific properties and stay there for weeks at a time, never needing a home in said location. And for me, just the natural nomad that I am, I was like, that's the lifestyle that I want. And how can I do it in a way that is authentic to myself, right? And creates the type of experience that I think the world needs to see. And I remember being at the front desk and just saying to myself, boutique hotels are really cool. I was working at the Donovan House at the time, which was a Thompson property, and just trying to see if there was anything else out there in the world that resembled what I was thinking about. And I couldn't find it. You know, I kept trying to say, man, there has to be a Black hotel, boutique hotel developer out there somewhere doing some really cool stuff. I had the hardest time trying to find that person. And I only kept coming up with Green Book era, you know, articles and stuff that would come up. And so I said, okay, well, if it doesn't exist, then I have to do it. And that was what, 2008, 9? So yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, just to jump in again, Damon, one, everything you said is so incredibly relatable to me. I am notorious for saying I'm bad at hospitality. I don't like actually being that person. The things I've said to guests is shocking and embarrassing. I'm not the best at it. There was never, and so I started in 2000. I purchased this property in 2014. So that's really when we started, and opened in 2015. And there was never a doubt in my mind that once I started doing it, that I was going to build more. It was never, I want to operate hotels. It was, I want to be a hotel owner of a portfolio of properties, right? Always from the get. And to your point, trying to find someone who is doing what we were doing. How did I not find you in 2014? I don't know, because you'd been at it for a minute, but it's hard. And I also got the same Green Book reference. Like, that's the closest I could get to like what you were trying to do, or what I may be trying to speak to from a Black person's perspective. It was hard. It was really, really hard to find a way and a path. So I've been, you know, when you talk about what are the opportunities or the changes that this pandemic has brought you, you know, we had, not only do we have a pandemic, but we had the summer of protest and sort of, you know, paying attention to Black lives for a summer. And that really brought me some opportunities, you know, BLLA, and then to speak with and see and hear Damon, and to continue to speak. And it's been really interesting how those, again, opportunities for diversity and representation have come to the fore this year, I think. And
absolutely.
Yeah. I think one thing I wanted to mention on top of that is it has been an interesting summer. I've met more people doing interesting things that look like me this summer than I probably ever had prior. I was on a diversity action committee Zoom meeting, and I was starting to hear the descriptions of the people that were in the meeting, and I'm like, man, I thought I knew everybody, right? Like, you go to these conferences, you see all 5 of us, and you think that's it, you know. And it was it was crazy and shocking to realize, man, there's a lot of us, and we're working in silos, and we don't really know that each other are doing things that could complement, right? Like, you're in landscape architect, right? It was just amazing to see, and to get all that group of people in the same room at the same time, even virtually, was just amazing. And it's been exciting to kind of see what everybody's working on. And I think my hope is one day that we can all kind of either come together, hopefully in real life, yeah, or at least do something in partnership with each other, because I think that if we were all connected, we'd be better off.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm gonna pour Amy. I'm so sorry.
No, you're good. You're good.
Jump back in. You'd had, so the whole audience knows, Amy sent us sort of a list of questions to think about and to chat about, and so we sound semi-prepared. I know Damon does, about myself. But you gave this great analogy about the dance, right? Yeah. If you want to repeat it before I finish my point, but it jumps off interestingly with what Damon is saying.
Yeah. You want me to pipe in with it? Okay.
Yeah.
So, so this was actually from Joey Hamilton, he's led the tourism efforts where I live here in Central Oregon for many years. And I was asking him to really explain DEI. And even though it's been around for a long time, it still feels like it needs explanation in 2020. So here's what he said. Diversity is asking me to the dance. Equity is asking me to dance. And inclusion is asking me to help you plan the dance.
So for me, I really struggled with that. That was the last thing that I was giving thought to before coming. I'm like, what do so I get the analogy, what do I do with it? What do I do with it? What do I do with it? And where I went with that is all the way back to financing and capital, because, you know, there's inclusion, there's equity, there's diversity, and then there's actually, what do I want to say? There's, I don't want to say dominance, but there's winning, there's playing, there's, you know, actually being like being the belle of the ball, to continue the analogy, if you will, right? And what does that look like and how does that happen? And for me, I kept going back to money and the nuance of doing real estate development and particularly through hotels, right? I had this really interesting conversation earlier this summer. Maybe it was 2 months ago. I don't know, time is where it is. But I was sitting with a guy I know who has been coming to my hotel since 2000, I don't know, for about a year and a half, because he's developing a Hilton up the street from me, right? And so we chat about development and all that sort of stuff. And I was talking to him about potentially creating a distressed asset fund, right? As banks start to write down or auction off hotel loans, like, is there an opportunity for me to seize, right? So I'm talking with him about this, and this is a white guy from Alabama, and we get along just fine, but we're chatting, and I'm like, so, and I know he's done this. I know his fund is about $200 million, and I know that prior to being a hotel developer, he managed the hospitality portfolio for Goldman Sachs, right? So I know he's got some advantages that I don't have, right? But I'm talking to him like, so how did you do it? And I'm trying to ask him just a strategy question, literally like, did you identify the hotels and then you put together a deck and then you went to bank? Like, what did you do? How did you do this? How did you do this? How did you do this? And what he kept saying to me was, you can't do it. You can't do it. No, you can't do it. And of course, you know, we're used to hearing that and ignoring it. I'm like, I can curse Amy. I was like, go fuck yourself. I'm gonna do it. So why don't you tell me how, right? And as he eventually did tell me how to set up the steps, but his point was really interesting when you want to talk about what does it look like to be at the dance, or what does it look like to be included. It was that he had been the portfolio manager at Goldman Sachs, and his partner was, I can't remember the guy's name, also an old white guy, but his partner had managed 3 hotel REITs, right? So they had, by nature of being older white men, just had access that I probably couldn't. I mean, I'm not giving up on this. I'm going to fucking figure it out. But that I couldn't have. They literally were in a position I couldn't be in, right? Yeah. And that sort of overcoming that, to play that game, to go to that kind of dance is hard, and it's very difficult. And then the thing that sparked me saying that, Damon, was you saying this, you're at this panel, and what you're finding is we actually have a network, right? People who look like us and develop like us do have a network somewhere. We just don't know it unless we really, really look for it, right? And it's been so inspirational for me to hear you even speak right now. Like, I'm frantically taking notes as you're like, well, I talked to this group and then that happened. I'm like, I'm gonna do this and that. Like, I don't have to sit and talk with a white guy who's like, you can't do it because you don't look like me, right? Like, we can have this conversation, and it's game changing. It's game changing, you know? Sorry, done. I'm done ranting.
No, I got chills. Damon?
Yeah, no, that was good. I think, oh man, that's a conversation I can have all day. And it took me, honestly, I came into it, ironically enough, I was pre-law in undergrad and decided not to go to law school to pursue hospitality, right?
Awesome.
Yeah. And I came from the hospital, like into hospitality purely from the creative side, not knowing anything about the finance side, not knowing how to actually buy a hotel. And it took me probably 5 years. I say, like I went to college again to figure out that whole side of the business and how things work, and having these conversations with people to really understand, like, how were y'all able to do this, right? Because I had no idea early on that Dream was part of Wyndham. Would have knowing the brand as I know it now doesn't even sound like a really great marriage, if you ask me. But that's how they got started. And now they're opening up. I think they have a pipeline of like 20 hotels. Nashville just opened, and a couple other properties just opened. So just to see that progression, but also understanding that they had a financial backer, one person, an Indian gentleman who backed everything very early on, just made it very simple, believed in the brand, and was ready to stroke the check anytime that they needed to. And for us, that's been the challenge, right? That's been the challenge. Everybody that we've talked to is already connected to one of these brands, whether it's Lifehouse and they believe in this fake tech component that exists in Lifehouse, or they like this brand because they believe in whatever. And trying to find that one person that believes that if you do a property that pays homage to Black culture and Black history and just is culturally relevant, I will outperform the market on both occupancy and on rate, right? The return that I will be able to get, and we've already seen it in New Orleans, I will be able to produce a better return than any other property that exists in the market right now. And the main reason why is because anybody who's Black and is traveling to New Orleans, they're looking at me first. Then, because I'm the only differentiated product there, right? I could find 20 properties with a Louis Armstrong picture in there, with saxophones propped up everywhere, and that's going to sell you some fish, some shrimp and grits at the restaurant. You don't have anything that really speaks to the true history of New Orleans and the real culture of it, and nothing in a city like New Orleans that is predominantly Black, nothing that's Black owned from a hospitality standpoint, right?
Wow.
So we stand out amongst, a bunch of properties that all look the same, all feel the same. It's very differentiated. And because of that, I can command a better occupancy and a better rate simply because of that fact. And so, now it's starting to get a little bit easier. We get people that get it, right? The summer of protest helped in that respect as far as getting the equity. But if we had that one wealthy benefactor that just truly believed, man, it would be unstoppable domino effect after that. So that's what we're looking for. So if anybody here that's listening knows that person, let me know.
Yeah.
Damon, let's talk offline after this, because I might ask that person. And that person, are you ready for this? Is an Ethiopian refugee.
Wow.
It's a Black guy, and he's for a long time. He's been here for like 20 years. Wow. But he's so motivated to have people who look like us do what we do and to support that financially. Like, that's the desire. So we can totally chat about what that might look like.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Wow. Thank you so much. I love the tangent. I'm throwing out the notes. Who needs this? I'm gonna start cussing.
I told you I was gonna try to avoid your questions. They were hard.
I knew it. For the record, I was a terrible waitress, so I'll throw that into the hat as well, and that's why I'm on this side of hospitality now. Let me see, what else do we want to hit on here? Because this is a great conversation. I mean, the thing that really stands out to me, and the reason that I pulled you both in and wanted to talk to you over the summer, is just like, I see it, all these independent properties, and Damon, you spoke to this. It's like they all start to feel the same. They all tend to be owned by white men who have a similar upbringing, who have familial wealth, who went to Cornell Hotel School, not to say anything negative about that, but you can start to see when you hear Moniqua's story and Damon's story and kind of getting through the fog and realizing, hey, there are people that look like me, and now there's more, and now people are willing to stand up and talk about it and are interested in investing in us. It's pretty, I'm just happy to see that this is beginning to happen. Damon, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about sort of those pieces, what you were up against when you were first starting the Moore Hotel.
Yeah, you know, for us, the Moore was really a proof of concept. I wanted to prove it to myself. We were having trouble in Oakland. So in Oakland, at the time that we were starting up, we were gaining traction with the vision, and the prices were skyrocketing in Oakland at the same time, right? Like, I don't think, and I've lived in DC, I went to Howard University, I've lived in a bunch of places. I've never seen gentrification happen as rapidly as it has happened in Oakland. I've been here for 5 years, and it is a totally different city than it was when I first moved here. I mean, there's so many things to talk about. I mean, both of our sports teams are gone, and it's just, there's so much, you know, the city is just totally different. Yeah. And so it was challenging. We had an investor that said, you know what, why don't you try and find something smaller, right? We believe in the vision. We believe that you'll do really well, and it'll just help you from a morale standpoint, just to have something in the market. And that something was the Moore in New Orleans. And then from that, we ended up getting a Gold Key Award from Boutique Design. We ended up, you know, it just ballooned into so much more than just a small 4-room property, right? And that was kind of the catalyst for us to move into a next phase where we could actually become true hotel developers. We had something to speak to, something to point to on paper, and it did really, really well. And so, yeah, I think one of the things that I also wanted to mention, kind of on that same breath, is that I went to Howard University, and one thing is, it's like vegans, right? They're always going to tell you that you're vegan. If you went to Howard University, you're going to hear that I went to Howard University at least one time during any kind of panel session. So letting you know, I went to Howard University. The one thing that I appreciated about going to Howard is I understood that the diversity that exists within the African diaspora, right? And what that truly means to finally meet people that look like you, but are from Kansas or are from Denver, and they don't really act like you, right? There's a whole different mindset. There's a whole different, you had a Black Republican group on campus. There was just so much happening at the same time that you realize, man, there's so much diversity that exists within our community. And if I had a property in each one of these cities, it would feel and act very differently, right? The brand just doesn't, you can't just put lipstick on a pig with the brand. It literally, you have to spend time there, get to know it, understand the nuances, understand that in Detroit, they call soda pop, right? And then in the South, in New Orleans, they call it a cold drink, right? And just understanding all these different nuances that make us such a beautiful, beautiful people. And I think that that's the most exciting aspect of even building hotels in places, is I can find out those cultural nuances and then play to them. And so it's exciting. It's an exciting time period to graduate from the more to bigger properties, and to really be able, from a food and beverage standpoint and a hospitality standpoint, be able to create a product that's truly reflective of that local area. And I don't think anybody's really done that.
Well, Moniqua, let's talk about Tucson, because what Damon described, I feel like you've got that happening in your property and in Tucson, your restaurant.
There's a couple of things that are so interesting, Damon, and my wheels are just going and wanting to actually collaborate with you on this. And sorry, I know it looks like, at least on my clock, we're over time, but
we are?
Right? Is that right? Have we been talking for an hour, y'all, or do we have more time?
We have at least 15 more minutes.
Fantastic. I can take it all. I'm super excited about this conversation we're having, because so I'm in Tucson, and Tucson is in Arizona, southern Arizona. It's a community that's more diverse than you would think. But when you say I thought I knew all the Black people, I was born here. My father was born here. So I thought I was related to all the Black people. Turns out I'm not, much to my surprise. They've started to show up here at the hotel. And I'm like, where the fuck did all you come from? And of course, they're like, well, we know you're here now. So we've been looking for Black people, right? Like we've been looking for the community, right? So, and this isn't the traveler yet, because there's not a ton of travelers yet for us. There's some, but not a lot. But just the community coming out and being, you know, a part of the community, which is great and inspiring. But to Amy's point, what I did with the Clifton was very much try to speak to place, try to speak to downtown Tucson at a particular time. It had this, now it's going through its own renaissance, if you will. But it had this period of time where I grew up in it, where it was sort of this dirty, like Western, gritty, rundown downtown. And it felt, I don't know, it felt sexy, if I'm being honest, you know? And it was this hybrid between like a cowboy, it's almost like an urban cowboy. It's like the movie Urban Cowboy almost. And I can't believe I'm making that reference. That makes me old or white or something, I don't know. But so it felt like that, and that's what I was trying to do here, and that really resonated because it was very true to Tucson, right? And I know that when I go and do other hotels, just like you're saying, Damon, I want to speak to place. I want to speak genuinely to the place and its culture and its community and its history, right? So fast forward to my second hotel, which took a pivot that was interesting. I didn't mean for it to take, but it's a building that was built in 1913. Well, part of it 1913, part of it 1921. And I'm looking at this building and I'm like, all right, well, what the hell am I going to do here, right? I already sort of spoke to Tucson as a place. Now what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And I say, well, I want to maybe speak to the 20s, right? Speak to the Jazz Age, speak to that sort of period of time, right? Speak to what's the Roaring 20s. And then I realized that the first independent hotel in downtown Tucson is called Hotel Congress. And I already copied from them once. I can't do it again. That's exactly what they do, right? Because they were founded in 1919. So I say, what's the other cool thing that was happening around this time period? What is it? What is it? What is it? And I say, fucking Black people, right? Like we had the Harlem Renaissance. We had our own thing happening right around this time. And I'll be damned if there wasn't a Black community in Tucson. People just don't know about it, right? They just don't. There's like 4 historic Black neighborhoods in Tucson, which is 4 more than I've ever lived in, honestly. And I really wanted to speak to that experience in the hotel. And it was interesting, to your point, you know, people were like, and it's all white people here, were like, that's a fantastic idea. You should totally do that. But who's going to go? I'm like, somebody's gonna go. And I still want to go back to that project. I want to go back. So this hotel ended up having a wine bar in the basement rather than, for various reasons, having to do with financial. And I'm also a complete wine freak. I'm a wine snob, getting my sommelier certification, hopefully. So it pivoted, but I want to go back to that project. I want to speak to the Black experience in Tucson, because there is one, right? People just don't know much about, and I'd like to be in other cities too, but right now that's a project I want to do. And I didn't realize that I may have the ability to go back and revisit it, because I always worry about, in Tucson particularly, the saturation of hotels, particularly boutique hotels in the market. It's a small market, right? I don't want to compete against myself too much, but I really feel like there's space for this kind of project. And I wasn't sure if I knew how to do it. And maybe I might have just found the right person to do it with and some money to make it happen. And that's super exciting to me. Super exciting. So I want to continue that conversation with you. Now I'm done.
This is a very interesting conversation, because I think as I hear you speak, I hear myself. Also a wine enthusiast. I have a project we're working on, and we're going to do a wine bar, partially financially related, also because the kitchen is just too small to do much else. and also in the basement of that property. So I think it's just interesting to hear a reflection of myself as someone else in the industry. So this has been a beautiful, beautiful conversation. So thank you, Amy, and thank you, Moniqua.
Thank you, everyone. I thank you, Damon, for the time. Thank you, Amy, for the facilitation. Trisha, for allowing us to go off. But I appreciate it.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you both. It's been amazing. I think there are so many parallels that I didn't even think of, but I'm glad that I got you two together at least. We could sit and have wine together probably and spend several more hours together. We'll definitely throw away my notes because they were not needed. You segued perfectly. I will share the podcast episodes that these two were on because that sort of is the prequel to this conversation. So Damon was episode 13, and then Moniqua, it was episodes.
I talk a lot, sorry.
Moniqua, we did 2 episodes because we did have a longer conversation, which was great.